Jeeves and the Tie That Binds, by P.G. Wodehouse. Copyright 1971 by P.G. Wodehouse. This book is read by Frederick Davidson. This book is 189 pages long and is divided into 17 chapters. The following material appears on the book's dust jacket. Jeeves belongs to a club for butlers in London's fashionable West End, and one of the rules there is that every member must contribute to the club book everything about the fellow for whom he's working, the idea being that such information will help those seeking new employment. Some dull employers are given only a few lines in the club book, but Jeeves has penned 18 pages about his master, Bertie Wooster, and Bertie, quite understandably, is perturbed. When the book falls into unscrupulous hands, Jeeves considers it a matter of honor to undo the damage, which he does in a gripping drama of unadulterated delight. So unique is the Wodehouse brand of humor that to describe it is as thankless and bootless as describing the taste of the perfect martini. Wodehouse can be compared to no other novelist, living or dead. His literary ancestor, instead, is the Roman dramatist Plautus, and, like Plautus, he is the manufacturer of 1,000 comically crossed connections. Chapter 1. As I slid into my chair at the breakfast table and started to deal with the toothsome eggs and bacon which Jeeves had given of his plenty, I was conscious of a strange exhilaration, if I've got the word right. Pretty good the set-up looked to me. Here I was, back in the old familiar headquarters, and the thought that I'd seen the last of Totley Towers, of Sir Watkin Bassett, of his daughter Madeline, and above all of the unspeakable Spode, or Lord Sidcup as he now calls himself, was like the medium dose for adult of one of those patent medicines which tone the system and impart a gentle glow. "These eggs, Jeeves," I said, "very good, very tasty." "Yes, sir." "Laid, no doubt, by contented hens. And the coffee perfect, nor must I omit to give a word of praise to the bacon. I wonder if you notice anything about me this morning?" "You seem in good spirits, sir." "Yes, Jeeves, I am happy today." "I am very glad to hear it, sir." "You might say I'm sitting on top of the world with a rainbow round my shoulder." "A most satisfactory state of affairs, sir." "What's the word I've heard you use from time to time? Begins with you." "Euphoria, sir?" "That's the one. I've seldom had a sharper attack of euphoria. I feel full to the brim of vitamin B. Mind you, I don't know how long it will last. Too often it is, when one feels fizziest, that the storm clouds begin doing their stuff." "Very true, sir. Full many a glorious morning have I seen flutter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing with golden face the meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy, anon permit the basest clouds to ride with ugly rack on his celestial face, and from the forlorn world his visage hide, stealing unseen to west with this disgrace." "Exactly," I said. I couldn't have put it better myself. One always has to budget for a change in the weather. Still, the thing to do is to keep on being happy while you can. "Precisely, sir. Carpe diem," the Roman poet Horace advised. The English poet Herrick expressed the same sentiment when he suggested that we should gather rosebuds while we may. Your elbow is in the butter, sir. Oh, thank you, Jeeves. Well, all right so far. Off to a nice start. But now we come to something which gives me pause. In recording the latest installment of the Bertram Wooster story, a task at which I am about to have a pop, I don't see how I can avoid delving into the past a good deal, touching on events which took place in previous installments, and explaining who's who and what happened when and where and why. And this will make it heavy going for those who have been with me from the start. "Old hat," they will cry, or, if French, déjà vu. On the other hand, I must consider the new customers. I can't just leave the poor perishers to try to puzzle things out for themselves. If I did, the exchanges in the present case would run somewhat as follows. Self, the relief I felt at having escaped from Totley Towers was stupendous. New C. What's Totley Towers? Self. For one thing, it had looked odds on that I should have to marry Madeline. New C. Who's Madeline? Self. Gussie Fink-Nottle, you see, had eloped with the cook. New C. Who's Gussie Fink-Nottle? Self. But most fortunately Spode was in the offing, and he scooped her up, saving me from the scaffold. New C. Who's Spode? You see, hopeless. Confusion would be rife, as one might put it. The only way out that I can think of is to ask the old gang to let their attention wander for a bit. There are heaps of things they can be doing. Washing the car, solving the crossword puzzle, taking the dog for a run, while I place the facts before the newcomers. Briefly then, owing to circumstances I needn't go into, Madeline Bassett, daughter of Sir Watkin Bassett of Totley Towers, Gloss, had long been under the impression that I was hopelessly in love with her, and had given me to understand that if ever she had occasion to return her betrothed, Gussie Fink-Nottle, to store, she would marry me, which wouldn't have fitted in with my plans at all, she, though physically in the pin-up class, being as mushy a character as ever broke biscuit, convinced that the stars are God's daisy chain, and that every time a fairy blows its wee nose, a baby is born. The last thing, as you can well imagine, one would want about the home. So when Gussie unexpectedly eloped with the cook, it looked as though Bertram was for it. If a girl thinks you're in love with her and says she will marry you, you can't very well voice a preference for being dead in a ditch. Not, I mean, if you want to regard yourself as a preux chevalier, as the expression is, which is always my aim. But just as I was about to put in my order for sackcloth and ashes, up, as I say, popped Spode, now going about under the alias of Lord Sidcup. He had loved her since she was so high, but had never got around to mentioning it, and when he did so now, they clicked immediately. And the thought that she was safely out of circulation and no longer a menace was possibly the prime ingredient in my current euphoria. I think that makes everything clear to the meanest intelligence, does it not? Right-ho. So, we can go ahead. Where were we? Ah, yes. I'd just told Jeeves that I was sitting on top of the world with a rainbow round my shoulder, but expressing a doubt as to whether this state of things would last, and how well-founded that doubt proved to be, for scarcely a forkful of eggs and bee later, it was borne in upon me that life was not the grand, sweet song I'd supposed it to be, but, as you might say, stern and earnest, and full of bumps. Was I mistaken, Jeeves? I said, making idle conversation as I sipped my coffee. Or, as the mists of sleep shredded away this morning, did I hear your typewriter going? Yes, sir. I was engaged in composition. A dutiful letter to Charlie Silversmith? I said, alluding to his uncle who held the post of butler at Deverill Hall, where we had once been pleasant visitors. Or possibly a lyric in the manner of the bloke who advocates gathering rosebuds? Neither, sir. I was recording the recent happenings at Totley Towers for the club book. And here, dash it, I must once more ask what I may call the old sweats, to let their attention wander, while I put the new arrivals abreast. Jeeves, you must know, I'm addressing the new arrivals, belongs to a club for butlers and gentlemen's gentlemen round Curzon Street way, and one of the rules there is that every member must contribute to the club book the latest information concerning the fellow he's working for, the idea being to inform those seeking employment of the sort of thing they will be taking on. If a member is contemplating signing up with someone, he looks him up in the club book, and if he finds that he puts out crumbs for the birdies every morning and repeatedly saves golden-haired children from being run over by automobiles, he knows he's on a good thing, and has no hesitation in accepting office. Whereas, if the book informs him that the fellow habitually kicks starving dogs, and generally begins the day by throwing the breakfast porridge at his personal attendant, he is warned in time to steer clear of him. Which is all very well, and one follows the train of thought, but in my opinion such a book is pure dynamite, and ought not to be permitted. There are, Jeeves has informed me, 11 pages in it about me, and what will the harvest be, I ask him, if it falls into the hands of my Aunt Agatha, with whom my standing is already low? She spoke her mind freely enough some years ago when, against my personal wishes, I was found with 23 cats in my bedroom, and again when I was accused, unjustly I need hardly say, of having marooned A.B. Filmer, the cabinet minister, on an island in her lake. To what heights of eloquence would she not soar if informed of my vicissitudes at Totley Towers? The imagination boggled, Jeeves, I tell him. To which he replies that it won't fall into the hands of my Aunt Agatha, she not being likely to drop in at the Junior Ganymede, which is what his club is called, and there the matter rests. His reasoning is specious, and although he has more or less succeeded in soothing my tremors, I still can't help feeling uneasy, and my manner, as I addressed him now, had quite a bit of agitation in it. "Good Lord!" I ejaculated, if ejaculated is the word I want. "Are you really writing up that Totley business?" "Yes, sir." "All the stuff about my being supposed to have pinched old Bassett's amber statuette?" "Yes, sir." "And the night I spent in a prison cell? Is this necessary? Why not let the dead past bury its dead? Why not forget all about it?" "Impossible, sir." "Why impossible? Don't tell me you can't forget things. You aren't an elephant." I thought I had him there, but no. "It is my membership in the Junior Ganymede which restrains me from obliging you, sir. The rules with reference to the club book are very strict, and the penalty for omitting to contribute to it severe. Actual expulsion has sometimes resulted." "I see," I said. I could appreciate that this put him in quite a spot, the feudal spirit making him wish to do the square thing by the young master, while a natural disinclination to get bunged out of a well-loved club urged him to let the young master boil his head. The situation seemed to me to call for what is known as a compromise. "Well, couldn't you water the thing down a bit? Omit one or two of the juicier episodes?" "I fear not, sir. The full facts are required. The committee insists on this." I suppose I ought not at this point to have expressed a hope that his blasted committee would trip over banana skins and break their ruddy necks, for I seemed to detect on his face a momentary look of pain. But he was broad-minded, and condoned it. "Your chagrin does not surprise me, sir. One can, however, understand their point of view. The Junior Ganymede Club book is a historic document. It has been in existence more than 80 years. "It must be the size of a house." "No, sir. The records are in several volumes. The present one dates back some 12 years, and one must remember that it is not every employer who demands a great deal of space." "Demands?" "I should have said requires. As a rule, a few lines suffice. Your 18 pages are quite exceptional." 18? I thought it was 11. "You are omitting to take into your calculations the report of your misadventures at Totley Towers, which I have nearly completed. I anticipate that this will run to approximately 7. If you will permit me, sir, I will pat your back." He made this kindly offer because I'd choked on a swallow of coffee. A few pats, and I was myself again, and more than a little incensed, as always happens when we're discussing his literary work. 18 pages, I mean to say, and every page full of stuff calculated, if thrown open to the public, to give my prestige the blackest of eyes. Conscious of a strong desire to kick the responsible parties in the seat of the pants, I spoke with a generous warmth. "Well, I call it monstrous. There's no other word for it. Do you know what that blasted committee of yours is inviting? Blackmail. That's what it's inviting. Let some man of ill will get his hooks on that book, and what'll be the upshot? Ruin, Jeeves. That's what'll be the upshot." I don't know if he drew himself to his full height because I was lighting a cigarette at the moment and wasn't looking, but I think he must have done so, for his voice, when he spoke, was the chilly voice of one who has drawn himself to his full height. "There are no men of ill will in the Junior Ganymede, sir." I contested this statement hotly. "That's what you think." "How about Brinkley?" I said. My allusion being to a fellow the agency had sent me some years previously, when Jeeves and I had parted company temporarily because he didn't like me playing the banjo-lele. "He's a member, isn't he?" "A country member, sir. He rarely comes to the club. In passing, sir, his name is not Brinkley, it is Bingley." I waved an impatient cigarette-holder. I was in no mood to split straws. Or is it hairs? "His name is not of the essence, Jeeves. What is of the is that he went off on his afternoon out, came back in an advanced state of intoxication, set the house on fire, and tried to dismember me with a carving knife. A most unpleasant experience, sir. Having heard noises down below, I emerged from my room and found him wrestling with the grandfather clock, with which he appeared to have had a difference. He then knocked over a lamp and leapt up the stairs at me, complete with cutlass. By a miracle I avoided becoming the late Bertram Wooster, but only by a miracle. And you say there are no men of ill will in the Junior Ganymede Club? Cha! I said. It is an expression I don't often use, but the situation seemed to call for it. Things had become difficult. Angry passions were rising, and dudgeon bubbling up a bit. It was fortunate that at this juncture the telephone should have tootled, causing a diversion. "Mrs. Travers, sir," said Jeeves, having gone to the instrument. Chapter 3. It was with no little gusto and animation that some hours later I set out for the tryst. This Ginger was one of my oldest buddies, not quite so old as Kipper Herring or Catsmeat Potter Purbright, with whom I'd plucked the gowans fine at prep school, public school, and university, but definitely ancient. Our rooms at Oxford had been adjacent, and it would not be too much to say that from the moment he looked in to borrow a siphon of soda water, we became more like brothers than anything, and this state of things had continued after we had both left the seat of learning. For quite a while he had been a prominent member of the Drones Club, widely known for his effervescence and vivacity, but all of a sudden he had tendered his resignation and gone to live in the country, oddly enough at Steeple Bumpley in Essex, where my Aunt Agatha has her lair. This, somebody told me, was due to the circumstance that he'd got engaged to a girl of strong character who disapproved of the Drones Club. You get girls like that every now and then, and in my opinion they're best avoided. Well, naturally this had parted us. He never came to London, and I, of course, never went to Steeple Bumpley. You don't catch me going anywhere near Aunt Agatha unless I have to. No sense in sticking one's neck out. But I had missed him sorely. Oh, for the touch of a vanished hand is how you might put it. Arriving at Barrybolt's, I found him in the lobby where you have the pre-luncheon gargle before proceeding to the grill room, and after the initial what-hoing, and what a time since we metting, inevitable when two vanished hands who haven't seen each other for ages re-establish contact, he asked me if I would like one for the tonsils. "I won't join you," he said. "I'm not actually on the wagon. I have a little light wine at dinner now and then, but my fiancée wants me to stay off cocktails. She says they harden the arteries." If you're about to ask me if this didn't make me purse the lips a bit, I can assure you that it did. It seemed to point to his having got hitched up with a Popsy, totally lacking in the proper spirit. And it bore out what I'd been told about her being a girl of strong character. No one who wasn't could have dashed the cup from his lips in this manner. She had apparently made him like it, too, for he had spoken of her not with the sullen bitterness of one crushed beneath the iron heel, but with devotion in every syllable. Plainly, he had got it up his nose, and didn't object to being bossed. How different from me, I reflected, that time when I was engaged to my Uncle Percy's bossy daughter, Florence Cray. Didn't last long, because she gave me the heave-ho and got betrothed to a fellow called Gorringe, who wrote vers libre. But while it lasted, I felt like one of those Ethiopian slaves Cleopatra used to push around, and I chafed more than somewhat. Whereas Ginger obviously hadn't even started to chafe. It isn't difficult to spot when a fellow's chafing, and I could detect none of the symptoms. He seemed to think that putting the presidential veto on cocktails showed what an angel of mercy the girl was, always working with his good at heart. The Worcesters do not like drinking alone, particularly with a critical eye watching them to see if their arteries are hardening, so I declined the proffered snort, reluctantly, for I was athirst, and came straight to the main item on the agenda paper. On my way to Barrybolt I had, as you may suppose, pondered deeply on this business of him standing for Parliament, and I wanted to know the motives behind the move. It looked cock-eyed to me. Aunt Dahlia tells me you're staying with her in order to be handy to Market Snodsbury, while giving the electors there the old oil, I said. Yes, she very decently invited me. She was at school with my mother. So she told me. How do you like it there? It's a wonderful place. Grade A. Gravel soil, main drainage, spreading grounds, and company's own water, and, of course, Anatole's cooking. Ah, he said, and I think he would have bared his head, only he hadn't a hat on. Very gifted, that man. A wizard, I agreed. His dinners must fortify you for the tasks you have to face. How's the election coming along? All right. Kissed any babies lately? He said again, this time with a shudder. I could see that I had touched an exposed nerve. What blighters babies are, Bertie, dribbling as they do at the side of the mouth. Still, it has to be done. My agent tells me to leave no stone unturned if I want to win the election. But why do you want to win the election? I'd have thought you wouldn't have touched Parliament with a 10-foot pole, I said, for I knew the society there was very mixed. What made you commit this rash act? My fiancé wanted me to, he said, and as his lips framed the word fiancé, his voice took on a sort of tremolo, like that of a male turtle-dove cooing to a female turtle-dove. She thought I ought to be carving out a career for myself. Do you want a career? Not much, but she insisted. The uneasiness I'd felt when he told me the Beazle had made him knock off cocktails deepened. His every utterance rendered it more apparent to an experienced man like myself that he had run up against something too hot to handle, and for a moment I thought of advising him to send her a telegram saying it was all off, and, this done, to pack a suitcase and catch the next boat to Australia. But feeling that this might give offence, I merely asked him what the procedure was when you stood for Parliament, or ran for it, as they would say in America. Not that I particularly wanted to know, but it was something to talk about, other than his frightful fiancée. A cloud passed over his face, which, I ought to have mentioned earlier, was well worth looking at, the eyes clear, the cheeks tanned, the chin firm, the hair ginger, and the nose shapely. It topped off, moreover, a body which also repaid inspection, being muscular and well knit. His general aspect, as a matter of fact, was rather like that presented by Esmond Haddock, the squire of Deverill Hall, where Jeeves's Uncle Charlie Silversmith drew his monthly envelope. He had the same poetic look, as if at any moment about to rhyme June with moon, yet gave the impression, as Esmond did, of being able, if he cared to fell an ox with a single blow. I don't know if he had ever actually done this, for one so seldom meets an ox. But in his undergraduate days he had felled people right and left, having represented the university in the ring as a heavyweight for a matter of 3 years. He may have included oxen among his victims. You go through hell, he said, the map still clouded as he recalled the past. I had to sit in a room where you could hardly breathe, because it was as crowded as the Black Hole of Calcutta, and listen to addresses of welcome till midnight. After that I went about making speeches. Well, why aren't you down there making speeches now? They've given you a day off. I came up to get a secretary. Surely you didn't go there without one? No, I had one all right, but my fiancée fired her. They had some sort of disagreement. I had pursed the lips a goodish bit when he told me about his fiancée and the cocktails, and I pursed them to an even greater extent now. The more I heard of this girl he'd got engaged to, the less I liked the sound of her. I was thinking how well she would get on with Florence Cray if they happened to meet. Twin souls, I mean to say. Each what a housemaid I used to know would have called an overbearing dishpot. I didn't say so, of course. There is a time to call someone an overbearing dishpot, and a time not to. Criticism of the girl he loved might be taken in ill part, as the expression is, and you don't want an ex-Oxford boxing blue taking things in ill part with you. Have you anyone in mind? I asked. Or are you just going to a secretary bin, accepting what they have in stock? I'm hoping to get hold of an American girl I saw something of before I left London. I was sharing a flat with Boko Fittleworth when he was writing a novel, and she came every day and worked with him. Boko dictates his stuff, and he said she was tops as a secretary. I have her address, but I don't know if she's still there. I'm going round there after lunch. Her name's Magnolia Glendennon. Can't be. Why not? Nobody could have a name like Magnolia. They could if they came from South Carolina, as she did. In the southern states of America you can't throw a brick without hitting a magnolia. But I was telling you about this business of standing for Parliament. First, of course, you have to get the nomination. How'd you manage that? Oh, my fiancée fixed it. She knows one of the cabinet ministers, and he pulled strings. A man named Filmer. Not A.B. Filmer? That's right. Is he a friend of yours? Wouldn't say exactly a friend. I came to know him slightly, owing to being chased with him onto the roof of a sort of summer house by an angry swan. This drew us rather close together for the moment, but we never became really chummy. Where was this? On an island on the lake at my Aunt Agatha's place at Steeple Bumpley. Living at Steeple Bumpley, you've probably been there. He looked at me with a wild surmise, much as those soldiers Jeeves has told me about looked on each other when on a peak in Darien, wherever that is. Is Lady Worpledon your aunt? And how? She's never mentioned it. She wouldn't. Her impulse would be to hush it up. Then, good Lord, she must be your cousin. No, my aunt. You can't be both. I mean, Florence. Florence Cray, my fiancée. It was a shock, I don't mind telling you, and if I hadn't been seated, I would probably have reeled. Though I ought not to have been so surprised. Florence was one of those girls who are always getting engaged to someone, first teaming up with Stilton Cheesewright, then me, and finally Percy Gorringe, who was dramatizing her novel Spindrift. The play, by the way, had recently been presented to the public at the Duke of York's Theatre, had laid an instantaneous egg, and had closed on the following Saturday. One of the critics said he had perhaps seen it at a disadvantage, because when he saw it the curtain was up. I had wondered a good deal what effect this had had on Florence's haughty spirit. "You're engaged to Florence?" I yipped, looking at him with a wild surmise. "Yes, didn't you know?" "Nobody tells me anything." Engaged to Florence, eh? Well, well. A less tactful man than Bertram Wooster might have gone on to add, "Oh, tough luck," or something along those lines, for there was no question but that the unhappy man was properly up against it. But if there's one thing the Woosters have in heaping measure, it is tact. I merely gripped his hand, gave it a shake, and wished him happiness. He thanked me for this. "You're lucky," I said, wearing the mask. "Don't I know it?" "She's a charming girl," I said, still wearing as above. "That just describes her." "Intellectual, too?" "Distinctly. Writes novels. Always at it." "Did you read Spindrift?" "Couldn't put it down," I said, cunningly not revealing that I hadn't been able to take it up. "Did you see the play?" "Twice. Too bad it didn't run. Gorringe's adaptation was the work of an ass." I spotted him as an ass the first time I saw him. Pity Florence didn't." "Yes, by the way, what became of Gorringe? When last heard of, she was engaged to him." "She broke it off." "Very wise of her. He had long side whiskers. She considered him responsible for the failure of the play and told him so. Ah, she would. What do you mean, she would? Her nature is so frank, honest, and forthright. It is, isn't it? She speaks her mind, invariably. It's an admirable trait. Oh, most. You can't get away with much with a girl like Florence. No. We fell into a silence. He was twiddling his fingers, and a sort of what-you-call-it had come into his manner, as if he wanted to say something, but was having trouble in getting it out. I remembered encountering a similar diffidence in the Reverend Stinker Pinker, when he was trying to nerve himself to ask me to come to Totley Towers. And you find the same thing in dogs, when they put a paw on your knee and look up into your face, but don't utter, though making it clear that there is a subject on which they are anxious to touch. "Bertie," he said at length. "Hello?" "Bertie?" "Yes." "Bertie." "Still here?" Excuse me asking, but, have you any cracked gramophone record blood in you? Perhaps your mother was frightened by one." And then it all came out in a rush, as if a cork had been pulled. "Bertie, something I must tell you about Florence, though you probably know it already, being a cousin of hers. She's a wonderful girl and practically perfect in every respect, but she has one characteristic which makes it awkward for those who love her and are engaged to her. Don't think I'm criticizing her. No, no, no. I'm just mentioning it." "Exactly." "Well, she has no use for a loser. To keep her esteem, you have to be a winner. She's like one of those princesses in the fairy tales who used to set fellows some task to perform. Might be scaling a mountain of glass, or bringing her a hair from the beard of the great Cham of Tartary, and then gave them the brush off when they couldn't make the grade." I recalled the princesses of whom he spoke, and I'd always thought them rather fat heads. I mean to say, what sort of foundation for a happy marriage is the bridegroom's ability to scale mountains of glass? A fellow probably wouldn't be called on to do it more than once about every 10 years, if that. "Gorringe," said Ginger, continuing, "was a loser, and that dished him. And long ago, someone told me, she was engaged to a gentleman jockey, and she chucked him because he took a spill at the canal turn in the Grand National. She's a perfectionist. I admire her for it, of course." "Of course." "A girl like her is entitled to have high standards." "Quite." "But as I say, it makes it awkward for me. She set her heart on my winning this Market Snodsbury election, heaven knows why, for I never thought she had any interest in politics, and if I lose it, I shall lose her too. So—" "Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of the party." "Exactly. You're going to canvass for me. Well, canvass like a ton of bricks, and see that Jeeves does the same. I've simply got to win." "You can rely on us." "Thank you, Bertie. I knew I could. And now let's go in and have a bite of lunch." Chapter 4. Having restored the tissues with the excellent nourishment which Barrabold's Hotel always provides, and arranged that Ginger was to pick me up in his car later in the afternoon, my own sports model being at the vet's with some nervous ailment, we parted, he to go in search of Magnolia Glendellen, I to walk back to the Worcester GHQ. It was, as you may suppose, in thoughtful mood that I made my way through London's thoroughfares. I was reading a novel of suspense the other day in which the heroine, having experienced a sock in the eye or two, was said to be lost in a maze of numbing thoughts, and that description would have fitted me like the paper on the wall. My heart was heavy. When a man is an old friend, and pretty bosom at that, it depresses you to hear that he's engaged to Florence Cray. I recalled my own emotions when I'd found myself in that unpleasant position. I'd felt like someone trapped in the underground den of the Secret Nine. Though, mark you, there's nothing to beef about in her outer crust. At the time when she was engaged to Stilton Cheesewright, I remember recording in the archives that she was tall and willowy, with a terrific profile, and luxuriant platinum blonde hair, the sort of girl who might, as far as looks were concerned, have been the star unit of the harem of one of the better-class sultans. and though I hadn't seen her for quite a while, I presumed that these conditions still prevailed. The fact that Ginger, when speaking of her, had gone so readily into his turtle-dove impersonation seemed to indicate as much. Looks, however, aren't everything. Against this pin-upness of hers, you had to put the bossiness which would lead her to expect the bloke she married to behave like a Hollywood yes-man. From childhood up she'd been... I can't think of the word. Begins with an I. No, it's gone. But I can give you the idea. When, at my private school, I once won a prize for scripture knowledge, which naturally involved a lot of researching into Holy Writ, and in the course of my researches I came upon the story of the military chap who used to say, "Come, and they cometh, and go, and they goeth." I've always thought that that was Florence in a nutshell. She would have given short shrift, as the expression is, to anyone who had gone when she said come, or the other way round. Imperious. That's the word I was groping for. She was as imperious as a traffic cop. Little wonder that the heart was heavy. I felt that Ginger, mistaking it for a peach, had plucked a lemon in the garden of love. And then my meditations took a less sombre turn. This often happens after a good lunch, even if you haven't had a cocktail. I reminded myself that many married men positively enjoy being kept on their toes by the little woman, and possibly Ginger might be one of them. He might take the view that when the little W made him sit up and beg and snap lumps of sugar off his nose, it was a compliment, really, because it showed that she was taking an interest. Feeling a bit more cheerful, I reached for my cigarette case and was just going to open it when, like an ass, I dropped it and it fell into the road. And as I stepped from the pavement to retrieve it, there was a sudden tooting in my rear, and whirling on my axis, I perceived that in about another 2 ticks I was going to be rammed amidships by a taxi. The trouble about whirling on your axis, in case you didn't know, is that you're liable, if not an adagio dancer, to trip over your feet, and this was what I proceeded to do. My left shoe got all mixed up with my right ankle, I tottered, swayed, and after a brief pause came down like some noble tree beneath the woodman's axe. And I was sitting there lost in a maze of numbing thoughts, when an unseen hand attached itself to my arm and jerked me back to safety. The taxi went on and turned the corner. Well, of course, the first thing the man of sensibility does on these occasions is to thank his brave preserver. I turned to do this, and blow me tight if the BP wasn't Jeeves. Came as a complete surprise. Couldn't think what he was doing there, and for an instant the idea occurred to me that this might be his astral body. Jeeves, I ejaculated. I'm pretty sure that's the word. Anyway, I'll risk it. Good afternoon, sir. I trust you are not too discommoded. That was a somewhat narrow squeak. It was indeed. I don't say my whole life passed before me, but a considerable chunk of it did. But for you, not at all, sir. Yes, you, and you only, saved me from appearing in tomorrow's obituary column. A pleasure, sir. It's amazing how you always turn up at the crucial moment, like the United States Marines. I remember how you did when A.B. Filmer and I were having our altercation with that swan, and there were other occasions too numerous to mention. Well, you will certainly get a rave notice in my prayers next time I make them. But how do you happen to be in these parts? Where are we, by the way? This is Curzon Street, sir. Of course. I'd have known that if I hadn't been musing. You were musing, sir? Deeply. I'll tell you about it later. This is where your club is, isn't it? Yes, sir, just round the corner. In your absence and having completed the packing, I decided to lunch there. Thank heaven you did. If you hadn't, I'd have been... What's that gag of yours? Something about wheels? Less than the dust beneath thy chariot wheels, sir. Or rather, the cabby's chariot wheels. Why are you looking at me with such a searching eye, Jeeves? I was thinking that your misadventure had left you somewhat dishevelled, sir. If I might suggest it, I think we should repair to the Junior Ganymede now. I see what you mean. You would give me a wash and brush up? Just so, sir. And perhaps a whisky and soda? Certainly, sir. I need one, sorely. Ginger's practically on the wagon, so there were no cocktails before lunch. And do you know why he's practically on the wagon? Because the girl he's engaged to has made him take that foolish step. And do you know who the girl he's engaged to is? My cousin, Florence Cray. Indeed, sir. Well, I hadn't expected him to roll his eyes and leap about, because he never does, no matter how sensational a news item. But I could see by the way one of his eyebrows twitched and rose perhaps 1/8 of an inch that I had interested him. And there was what is called a wealth of meaning in that "indeed, sir." He was conveying his opinion that this was a bit of luck for Bertram, because a girl you've once been engaged to is always a lurking menace, till she gets engaged to someone else, and so cannot decide at any moment to play a return date. I got the message and thoroughly agreed with him, though naturally I didn't say so. Jeeves, you see, is always getting me out of entanglements with the opposite sex, and he knows all about the various females who from time to time have come within an ace of hauling me to the altar rails. But of course we don't discuss them. To do so, we feel, would come under the head of bandying a woman's name, and the Worcesters do not bandy women's names. Nor do the Jeeveses. I can't speak for his Uncle Charlie Silversmith, but I should imagine that he, too, has his code of ethics in this respect. These things generally run in families. So I merely filled him in about her making Ginger stand for Parliament and the canvassing we were going to undertake, urging him to do his utmost to make the electors think along the right lines, and he said, "Yes, sir," and "Very good, sir," and "I quite understand, sir." And we proceeded to the Junior Ganymede. An extremely cosy club it proved to be. I didn't wonder that he liked to spend so much of his leisure there. It lacked the sprightliness of the drones. I shouldn't think there was much bread and sugar thrown about at lunchtime, and you would hardly expect that there would be when you reflected that the membership consisted of elderly butlers and gentlemen's gentlemen of fairly ripe years. But as regards comfort, it couldn't be faulted. The perler I'd taken left me rather tender in the fleshy parts, and it was a relief after I'd been washed and brushed up, and was on the spruce side once more, to sink into a well-stuffed chair in the smoking-room. Sipping my whisky and S, I brought the conversation round again to Ginger and his election, which was naturally the front-page stuff of the day. "Do you think he has a chance, Jeeves?" He weighed the question for a moment, as if dubious as to where he would place his money. "It's difficult to say, sir. Market Snodsbury, like so many English country towns, might be described as straight-laced. It sets a high value on respectability." "Well, Ginger's respectable enough." "True, sir, but as you are aware, he has had a past." "Well, not much of a one." "Sufficient, however, to prejudice the voters, should they learn of it." "Which they can't possibly do." "I suppose he's in the club book." 11 pages, sir." "But you assure me that the contents of the club book will never be revealed." "Never, sir. Mr. Winship has nothing to fear from that quarter." His words made me breathe more freely. "Jeeves," I said, "your words make me breathe more freely. As you know, I am always a bit uneasy about the club book. Kept under lock and key, is it?" "Not actually under lock and key, sir, but it is safely bestowed in the secretary's office." "Then there's nothing to worry about." "I would not say that, sir. Mr. Winship must have had companions in his escapades, and they might inadvertently make some reference to them, which would get into gossip columns in the press and thence into the Market Snodsbury journals. I believe there are 2 of these, one rigidly opposed to the Conservative interest, which Mr. Winship is representing. It is always a possibility, and the results would be disastrous. I have no means at the moment of knowing the identity of Mr. Winship's opponent, but he is sure to be a model of respectability whose past can bear the strictest investigation." "You're pretty gloomy, Jeeves. Why aren't you gathering rosebuds? The poet Herrick would shake his head." "I am sorry, sir. I did not know that you were taking Mr. Winship's fortune so much to heart, or I would have been more guarded in my speech. Is victory in the election of such importance to him?" "It's vital. Florence will hand him his hat if he doesn't win.
Surely not, sir.
That's what he says, and I think he's right. His observations on the subject were most convincing. He says she's a perfectionist and has no use for a loser. It is well established that she handed Percy Gorringe the pink slip because the play he made of her novel only ran 3 nights.
Indeed, sir.
Well documented fact.
Then let us hope that what I fear will not happen, sir.
We were sitting there hoping that what he feared would not happen, when a shadow fell on my whisky and I saw that we'd been joined by another member of the junior Ganymede, a smallish, plumpish, Gord-Elpers-ish member, wearing clothes more suitable for the country than the town, and a tie that suggested that he belonged to the Brigade of Guards, though I doubted if this was the case. As to his manner, I couldn't get a better word for it at the moment than familiar, but I looked it up later in Jeeves's Dictionary of Synonyms, and found that it had been unduly intimate, too free, forward, lacking in proper reserve, deficient in due respect, impudent, bold, and intrusive. Well, when I tell you that the first thing he did was to prod Jeeves in the lower ribs with an uncouth forefinger, you will get the idea. "Hello, Reggie," he said, and I froze in my chair, stunned by the revelation that Jeeves's first name was Reginald. It had never occurred to me before that he had a first name. I couldn't help thinking what embarrassment would have been caused if it had been Bertie.
"Good afternoon,"
said Jeeves, and I could see that the chap was not one of his inner circle of friends. His voice was cold, and anyone less lacking in proper reserve and deficient in due respect would have spotted this and recoiled. The Gord-Elpers fellow appeared to notice nothing amiss. His manner continued to be that of one who has met a pal of long standing. "How's yourself, Reggie?"
"I am in tolerably good health, thank you."
"Lost weight, haven't you? You ought to live in the country like me and get good country butter." He turned to me. "And you ought to be more careful, Cocky, dancing about in the middle of the street like that. I was in that cab, and I thought you were a goner. You're Worcester, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, amazed. I hadn't known I was such a public figure.
"Thought so. I don't often forget a face. Well, I can't stay chatting with you. I've got to see the secretary about something. Nice to have seen you, Reggie." "Goodbye." "Nice to have seen you, Worcester, old man."
I thanked him, and he withdrew. I turned to Jeeves, that wild surmise I was speaking about earlier functioning on all 12 cylinders. "Who was that?" He did not reply immediately, plainly too ruffled for speech. He had to take a sip of his liqueur brandy before he was master of himself. His manner, when he did speak, was that of one who would have preferred to let the whole thing drop.
"The person you mentioned at the breakfast table, sir. Bingley," he said, pronouncing the name as if it soiled his lips.
I was astounded. You could have knocked me down with a toothpick. Bingley? I'd never have recognized him. He's changed completely. He was quite thin when I knew him, and very gloomy, you might say sinister. Always seemed to be brooding silently on the coming revolution, when he would be at liberty to chase me down Park Lane with a dripping knife. The brandy seemed to have restored Jeeves. He spoke now with his customary calm.
"I believe his political views were very far to the left at the time when he was in your employment. They changed when he became a man of property."
"Man of property, is he?"
"An uncle of his in the grocery business died and left him a house and a comfortable sum of money."
"I suppose it often happens that the views of fellows like Bingley change when they come into money?"
"Very frequently. They regard the coming revolution from a different standpoint."
"I see what you mean. They don't want to be chased down Park Lane with dripping knives themselves. Is he still a gentleman's gentleman?"
"He has retired. He lives a life of leisure in Market Snodsbury."
"Market Snodsbury? Well, that's funny."
"Sir?"
"Odd. I mean that he should live in Market Snodsbury."
"Many people do, sir."
"But when that's just where we're going, sort of a coincidence. His uncle's house is there, I suppose?"
"One presumes so."
"We may be seeing something of him."
"I hope not, sir. I disapprove of Bingley. He is dishonest, Not a man to be trusted.
What makes you think so?
It's merely a feeling.
Well, it was no skin off my nose. A busy man like myself hasn't time to go about trusting Bingley. All I demanded of Bingley was that if our paths should cross, he would remain sober and keep away from carving knives. Live and let live is the Worcester motto. I finished my whisky and soda and rose. Well, I said, there's one thing. Holding the strong conservative views he does, it ought to be a snip to get him to vote for Ginger. And now, we'd better be getting along. Ginger is driving us down in his car, and I don't know when he'll be coming to fetch us. Thanks for your princely hospitality, Jeeves. You have brought new life to the exhausted frame.
Not at all, sir.
Chapter 5. Ginger turned up in due course, and on going out to the car, I saw that he'd managed to get hold of Magnolia all right, for there was a girl sitting in the back, and when he introduced us his Mr. Worcester, Miss Glendennan told the story. Nice girl she seemed to me, and quite nice-looking. I wouldn't say hers was the face that launched 1,000 ships, to quote one of Jeeves's gags. And this is probably all to the good, for Florence, I imagine, would have had a word to say if Ginger had returned from his travels with something in tow calculated to bring a whistle to the lips of all beholders. A man in his position has to exercise considerable care in his choice of secretaries, ruling out anything that might have done well in the latest Miss America contest. But you certainly could describe her appearance as pleasant. She gave me the impression of being one of those quiet, sympathetic girls whom you could tell your troubles to in the certain confidence of having your hand held and your head patted. The sort of girl you could go to and say, "I say, I've just committed a murder and it's worrying me rather." And she would reply, "There, there, try not to think about it. It's the sort of thing that might happen to anybody." The little mother, in short, with the added attraction of being tops at shorthand and typing. I could have wished Ginger's affairs in no better hands. Jeeves brought out the suitcases and stowed them away, and Ginger asked me to do the driving, as he had a lot of business to go into with his new secretary, giving her the lowdown on her duties, I suppose. We set out, accordingly, with me and Jeeves in front, and about the journey down there is nothing of interest to report. I was in merry mood throughout, as always when about to get another whack at Anatole's cooking. Jeeves presumably felt the same, for he, like me, is one of that master's skillet-wielder's warmest admirers. But whereas I sang a good deal as we buzzed along, he maintained, as is his custom, the silent reserve of a stuffed frog, never joining in the chorus, though cordially invited to. Arriving at journey's end, we all separated. Jeeves attended to the luggage, Ginger took Magnolia Glendennan off to his office, and I made my way to the drawing-room, which I found empty. There seemed to be nobody about, as so often happens when you fetch up at a country house latish in the afternoon. No sign of Aunt Dahlia, nor of Uncle Tom, her mate. I toyed with the idea of going to see if the latter was in the room where he keeps his collection of old silver, but thought better not. Uncle Tom is one of those enthusiastic collectors who, if in a position to grab you, detain you for hours, talking about sconces, foliation, ribbon wreaths in high relief, and gadroon borders, and one wants as little of that sort of thing as can be managed. I might have gone to pay my respects to Anatole, but there again I thought better not. He, too, is inclined to the long monologue when he gets you in his power, his pet subject being the state of his interior. He suffers from bouts of what he calls mal au foie, and his conversation would be of greater interest to a medical man than to a layman like myself. I don't know why it is, but when somebody starts talking to me about his liver, I never can listen with real enjoyment. On the whole, the thing to do seemed to be to go for a saunter in the extensive grounds and messuages. It was one of those heavy, sultry afternoons when nature seems to be saying to itself, "Now shall I or shall I not scare the pants off these people with a hell of a thunderstorm?" But I decided to risk it. There's a small wooded bit not far from the house, which I've always been fond of, and thither I pushed along. This wooded bit contains one or two rustic benches for the convenience of those who wish to sit and meditate, and as I hove alongside the first of these, I saw that there was an expensive-looking camera on it. It surprised me somewhat, for I had no idea that Aunt Dahlia had taken to photography, but of course you never know what aunts will be up to next. The thought that occurred to me almost immediately was that if there was going to be a thunderstorm, it would be accompanied by rain, and rain falling on a camera doesn't do it any good. I picked the thing up accordingly, and started off with it to take it back to the house, feeling that the old relative would thank me for my thoughtfulness, possibly with tears in her eyes, when there was a sudden bellow, and an individual emerged from behind a clump of bushes. Startled me considerably, I don't mind telling you. He was an extremely stout individual with a large pink face and a Panama hat with a pink ribbon. A perfect stranger to me, and I wondered what he was doing here. He didn't look the sort of crony Aunt Dahlia would have invited to stay, and still less Uncle Tom, who is so allergic to guests that when warned of their approach he generally makes a bolt for it and disappears, leaving not a rack behind, as I've heard Jeeves put it. However, as I was saying, you never know what aunts will be up to next, and no doubt the ancestor had some good reason for asking the chap to come and mix, so I beamed civilly and opened the conversation with a genial, "Hello there." "A nice day," I said, continuing to beam civilly. "Or, rather, not so frightfully nice. Looks as if we were in for a thunderstorm." Something seemed to have annoyed him. The pink of his face had deepened to about the colour of his Panama hat ribbon, and both his chins trembled slightly. "Damn thunderstorms," he responded. Curtly, I suppose, would be the word, and I said I didn't like them myself. It was the lightning, I added, that I chiefly objected to. They say it never strikes twice in the same place, but then it hasn't got to. "Damn the lightning! What are you doing with my camera?" This naturally opened up a new line of thought. "Oh, is this your camera?" "Yes, it is." "I was taking it to the house." "You were you?" "I didn't want it to get wet." "Oh, and who are you?" I was glad he had asked me that. His whole manner had made it plain to a keen mind like mine that he was under the impression that he'd caught me in the act of absconding with his property, and I was glad to have the opportunity of presenting my credentials. I could see that if we were ever to have a good laugh together over this amusing misunderstanding, there would have to be a certain amount of preliminary spade work. "Worcester is the name," I said. "I'm my aunt's nephew. I mean," I went on, for those last words seemed to me not to have rung quite right, "Mrs. Travers is my aunt." "You're staying in the house?" "Yes, just arrived." "Oh," he said again, but this time in what you might call a less hostile tone of voice, though still not to be described as chummy. There followed a silence, presumably occupied by him in turning things over in his mind in the light of my statement and examining them in depth, and then he said, "Oh," once more, and stumped off. I made no move to accompany him. What little I had had of his society had been ample. As we were staying in the same house, we would no doubt meet occasionally, but not, I resolved, if I saw him first. The whole episode reminded me of my first encounter with Sir Watkin Bassett, and the misunderstanding about his umbrella. That had left me shaken, and so had this. I was glad to have a rustic bench handy, so that I could sit and try to bring my nervous system back into shape. The sky had become more and more inky, I suppose is the word I want, and the odds on a thunderstorm shorter than ever, but I still lingered. It was only when they came from above a noise like 57 trucks going over a wooden bridge that I felt that an immediate move would be judicious. I rose, and soon gathered speed, and I had reached the French window of the drawing-room, and was on the point of popping through, when from within there came the sound of a human voice. On second thoughts, delete the word human, for it was the voice of my recent acquaintance with whom I had chatted about cameras. I halted. There was a song I used to sing in my bath at one time, the refrain or burthen of which began with the words, "I stopped, and I looked, and I listened." And this was what I did now, except for the looking. It wasn't raining, nor was there any repetition of the truck going over a wooden bridge noise. It was as though nature had said to itself,
Oh, to hell with it, and decided that it was too much trouble to have a thunderstorm after all. So I wasn't getting struck by lightning or even wet, which enabled me to remain in statu quo. The camera bloke was speaking to some unseen companion, and what he said was, "Wooster, his name is, says he's Mrs. Travers' nephew." It was plain that I had arrived in the middle of a conversation. The words must have been preceded by a query, possibly, "Oh, by the way, do you happen to know who that tall, slender, good-looking, I might almost say fascinating, young man I was talking to outside there would be?" Though, of course, possibly not. That, at any rate, must have been the gist, and I suppose the party of the second part had replied, "No, sorry, I can't place him," or words to that effect. Whereupon the camera chap had spoken as above, and as he spoke as above, a snort rang through the quiet room. A voice, speaking with every evidence of horror and disgust, exclaimed, "Wooster!" and I quivered from hair-do to shoe-sole. I may even have gasped, but fortunately not loud enough to be audible beyond the French window. For it was the voice of Lord Sidcup, or, as I shall always think of him, no matter how many titles he may have inherited, as Spode. Spode, mark you, whom I had thought and hoped I had seen the last of, after dusting the dust of Totley Towers from the Worcester feet. Spode, who went about seeking whom he might devour, and from early boyhood had been a hissing and a byword to all right-thinking men. Little wonder that for a moment everything seemed to go black, and I had to clutch at a passing rose-bush to keep from falling. This Spode, I must explain for the benefit of the newcomers who have not read the earlier chapters of my memoirs, was a character whose path had crossed mine many a time, and oft, as the expression is, and always with the most disturbing results. I have spoken of the improbability of a beautiful friendship ever getting under way between me and the camera chap, but the likelihood of any such fusion of souls, as I've heard Jeeves call it, between me and Spode was even more remote. Our views on each other were definite. His was that what England needed, if it was to become a land fit for heroes to live in, was fewer and better Worcesters. While I'd always felt there was nothing wrong with England that a ton of bricks falling from a height on Spode's head wouldn't cure. "You know him?" said the camera chap. "I'm sorry to say I do," said Spode, speaking like Sherlock Holmes asked if he knew Professor Moriarty. "How did you happen to meet him?" "I found him making off with my camera." "Ah. Naturally I thought he was stealing it, but if he's really Mrs. Travers' nephew, I suppose I was mistaken." Spode would have none of this reasoning, though it seemed pretty sound to me. He snorted again with even more follow-through than the first time. "Being Mrs. Travers' nephew means nothing. If he was the nephew of an archbishop, he would behave in a precisely similar manner. Worcester would steal anything that was not nailed down, provided he could do it unobserved. He couldn't have known you were there." "No, I was behind a bush." "And your camera looks like a good one?" "Cost me a lot of money." "Then of course he was intending to steal it. He must have thought he'd dropped into a bit of good luck. Let me tell you about Worcester. The first time I met him was in an antique shop. I'd gone there with Sir Watkin Bassett, my future father-in-law. He collects old silver, and Sir Watkin had propped his umbrella up against a piece of furniture. Worcester was there, but lurking, so we didn't see him." "In a dark corner, perhaps?" "Or behind something. The first we saw of him, he was sneaking off with Sir Watkins's umbrella." "Pretty cool." "Oh, he's cool, all right. These fellas have to be." "I suppose so. Must take a nerve of ice." To say that I boiled with justifiable indignation would not be putting it too strongly. As I have recorded elsewhere, there was a ready explanation of my behaviour. I had come out without my umbrella that morning, and completely forgetting that I had done so, I had grasped old Bassett's, obeying the primeval instinct which makes a man without an umbrella reach out for the nearest one in sight, like a flower groping toward the sun, unconsciously, as it were.
Spode resumed. They had taken a moment off, no doubt, in order to brood on my delinquency. His voice was now that of one about to come to the high spot in his narrative.
You will hardly believe this, but soon after that he turned up at Totley Towers, Sir Watkins' house in Gloucestershire.
Incredible.
I thought you'd think so.
Disguised, of course, a wig, a false beard, his cheeks stained with walnut juice.
No, he came quite openly, invited by my future wife. She has a sort of sentimental pity for him. I think she hopes to reform him.
Girls will be girls.
Yes, but I wish they wouldn't.
Did you rebuke your future wife?
I wasn't in a position to then.
Probably a wise thing anyway. I once rebuked the girl I wanted to marry, and she went off and teamed up with a stockbroker. So what happened?
He stole a valuable piece of silver, a sort of silver cream jug, a cow creamer, they call it.
My doctor forbids me cream. You had him arrested, of course.
We couldn't. No evidence.
But you knew he'd done it?
We were certain.
Well, that's how it goes. See any more of him after that?
This you will not believe. He came to Totley Towers again.
Impossible.
Once more invited by my future wife.
Would that be the Miss Bassett who arrived last night?
Yes, that was Madeline.
Lovely girl. I met her in the garden before breakfast. My doctor recommends a breath of fresh air in the early morning. Did you know she thinks those bits of mist you see on the grass are the elves' bridal veils?
She has a very whimsical fancy.
Nothing to be done about it, I suppose. But you were telling me about this second visit of Worcester's to Totley Towers. Did he steal anything this time?
An amber statuette worth £1,000.
He certainly gets around, said the camera chap with, I thought, a sort of grudging admiration. I hope you had him arrested?
We did. He spent the night in the local jail, but next morning Sir Watkin weakened and let him off.
Mistaken kindness.
So I thought.
The camera chap didn't comment further on this, though he was probably thinking that of all the soppy families introduced to his notice, the Bassets took the biscuit. Well, I'm very much obliged to you, he said, for telling me about this man Worcester and putting me on my guard. I brought a very valuable bit of old silver with me. I'm hoping to sell it to Mr. Travers. If Worcester learns of this, he's bound to try to purloin it. And I can tell you that if he does, and I catch him, there will be none of this nonsense of a single night in jail. He will get the stiffest sentence the law can provide. And now, how about a quick game of billiards before dinner? My doctor advises a little gentle exercise.
I should enjoy it.
Then let us be getting along. Having given them time to remove themselves, I went in and sank down on a sofa. I was profoundly stirred, for if you think fellows enjoy listening to the sort of things Spode had been saying about me, you're wrong. My pulse was rapid, and my brow wet with honest sweat, like the village blacksmith. I was badly in need of alcoholic refreshment, and just as my tongue was beginning to stick out and blacken at the roots, shiver my timbers if Jeeves didn't enter left-centre with a tray containing all the makings. St. Bernard dogs, you probably know, behave in a similar way in the Alps, and are well thought of in consequence. Mingled with the ecstasy which the sight of him aroused in my bosom was a certain surprise that he should be acting as cup-bearer. It was a job that should rightly have fallen into the province of Seppings, Aunt Dahlia's butler. "Hello, Jeeves!" I ejaculated.
"Good evening, sir. I have unpacked your effects. Can I pour you a whisky and soda?"
"You can indeed. But what are you doing buttling? This mystifies me greatly. Where's Seppings?"
"He has retired to bed, sir, with an attack of indigestion, consequent upon a too liberal indulgence in Monsieur Anatole's cooking at lunch. I am undertaking his duties for the time being."
"Very good of you, and very good of you to pop up at this particular moment. I've had a shock, Jeeves."
"I'm sorry to hear that, sir."
"Did you know Spode was here?"
"Yes, sir."
"And Miss Bassett?"
"Yes, sir."
"We might as well be at Totley Towers."
I can appreciate your dismay, sir, but fellow guests are easily avoided.
Yes, and if you avoid them, what do? They go about telling men in Panama hats you're a sort of cross between Raffles and one of those fellows who pinch bags at railway stations, I said, and in a few crisp words I gave him a resume of Spode's remarks.
Most disturbing, sir.
Very. You know, and I know, how sound my motives were for everything I did at Totley. But what if Spode tells Aunt Agatha?
An unlikely contingency, sir.
I suppose it is.
But I know just how you feel, sir. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he who filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him, and makes me poor indeed.
Neat, that. Your own?
No, sir. Shakespeare's.
Shakespeare said some rather good things.
I understand that he has given uniform satisfaction, sir. Shall I mix you another?
Do just that thing, Jeeves, and with all convenient speed. He had completed his St. Bernard act and withdrawn, and I was sipping my second rather more slowly than the first, when the door opened and Aunt Dahlia bounded in, all joviality and rosy complexion.